Well, I want to start today with a question, and the question is this: where in the world do you think it is most dangerous to be a Christian? Now, if you've been around church for any length of time, you would have heard of many places around the world where it's dangerous to be a Christian. It may be politically dangerous to be a Christian. There are war zones in the Middle East, perhaps, countries with strict anti-Christian laws. If those sort of places come to mind, then you'd be right. They are some of the most dangerous places to be a Christian. And that danger became personal for me when I was working in missions, and it touched people that I knew. When I was working with Operation Mobilisation, a German team member was killed at one of our guest houses in Kabul in Afghanistan, and her Afghani security guard was beheaded. And another Finnish girl, one of our OMers, was abducted at the same time. She was later released once a ransom had been paid. These women were serving others, living out their faith under dangerous circumstances, and they paid the ultimate price. Or even in another country, which many of us may have even visited, a country which we may think, well, that's actually a relatively safe place. In broad daylight, an OMer and local pastor, Raymond Coe, was abducted from his car and taken away. The whole event was captured on security footage. His car is surrounded by 3 black SUVs. They pull him over to the side of the road. They hustle him out of the car, put him in one of the SUVs. He disappears. That was 7 years ago, and no one's heard from him since. His family is still waiting to hear from the Malaysian authorities about where he is. Or then there's Bonnie Witherall, who was an OMer serving in Lebanon at a maternal health clinic where she volunteered, and her husband was working elsewhere in the community as well. Well, one day, as she was at the clinic, there was a knock at the door, and she opened the door, and a religious extremist shot her. She was dead. Died for her faith, serving and loving mothers. And when we hear these stories, we're absolutely shocked and horrified that those things could happen to our family, a Christian family around the world. And we have to ask ourselves, if following Jesus can cost those people their lives, what's it costing me? And am I willing to pay the price in the ordinary, everyday ways that he calls me to follow him? Because you see, the cost of following Jesus is not just paid by Christians who live in far-off countries. It is paid by those people, as we've seen. But it's not only paid by them. It's paid by all Christians who follow Jesus. It's the cost of following Jesus is paid in our homes. It's paid at our work. It's paid in our friendships. And sometimes we pay the price of following Jesus in those quiet corners of our own heart as we surrender that thing we've been holding on to for decades. We finally pay the price and surrender it to God. Friends, if your Christian faith has never cost you anything, then it's worth asking yourself, are you even following Jesus? Because to follow Jesus is to pay the price of following Jesus. And that brings us to our reading for today. This record of an encounter that James and John had when they went to Jesus in private. As Jesus was making his way up to Jerusalem, where he would later be crucified in just a few days' time, James and John sought out the Lord for a private conversation. And this passage we're looking to today comes right after Jesus' third prediction of his death. He told the disciples 3 times that he was going to Jerusalem to be handed over to the authorities and that he would be killed. And so it says in verses 33 and 34, the Son of Man will be delivered over, they will mock him, spit on him, flog him and kill him, and 3 days later he will rise. He'd been very clear with them about what he was going to Jerusalem for. And after hearing this, what do you think the disciples might have said to Jesus? After this 3rd time he told them he was going to Jerusalem to be arrested, mocked, spat on, and killed. You would think that they might say something like, man, that's awful. How can we stand with you in that? What can we do to help? Or you might think Peter, being the kind of guy he is, he would have said, never, I will fight to the death to protect you. It's the kind of thing Peter would say, isn't it? But that's not what they said. Instead, James and John come privately to Jesus and they ask this in verse 35 and 37. Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. It's a jaw-dropping request, isn't it? Then Jesus says, what would you like me to do? He says, let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in glory. I wonder if you can imagine how disappointing that would have been for Jesus to hear that question. How painful that his friends, his closest friends, had not given a second thought to the fact that he'd just told them he was going to die, and all they could do was think about themselves. As Jesus goes to his death, they're thinking about their own glory and their own recognition, and they ask Jesus for a place at the top. They clearly have no idea what's going on. They have no idea what they're really asking Jesus. They're asking for a throne when he is looking at a crown of thorns. They're asking for a coronation when Jesus is facing a crucifixion. They're asking for glory when Jesus is going to the grave. And Jesus' response to them, he challenges them. You see, their request reveals that James and John, and even the disciples more widely, they simply hadn't understood Jesus' purpose or his plan. And it's very clear what Jesus came to do. He came to die. He'd spelled it out for them 3 times. His purpose was the cross. But this request from James and John reveals that the disciples just had not understood that. They had not understood that Jesus' purpose was the cross. Now, it's easy for us in hindsight to say that. I don't want to be too hard on these guys. But they just simply hadn't seen it. And they're like many people today. We're interested in rank. We're interested in power. We're interested in greatness. And we shouldn't be surprised to learn that in Jesus' kingdom, the road to greatness and the road to rank and the road to power is the polar opposite of what the world suggests. And Jesus says that to them. He goes on a little later to say, don't lord it over like the religious rulers do and the Gentiles do. We shouldn't be surprised to learn that in Jesus' kingdom, the road to greatness is the polar opposite of that, of what the world suggests. What is it? What is the road to greatness? Well, it starts with submission. That's the first cost of following Jesus. Lowering ourselves before God and before others. And James and John walked up to Jesus. They weren't thinking about that. Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. What do you want me to do for you, he says? Let one of us sit at your right hand and the other at your left in your glory. I think that's a pretty bold request, isn't it? Pretty bold and presumptuous. And in the context, it's heartless. Jesus has just explained he's about to die, yet they don't even consider that. They don't even acknowledge that that might be painful for him. They're so caught up in their own ambition that they're blind to what God is doing in that moment. And that's the thing about human ambition. It can make us blind if we're not careful. James and John were blind to Jesus' suffering. They were blind to his purpose. They assumed he was about to set up an earthly kingdom and they wanted the seats at the top, the seats of honour. It's a pretty worldly request that they've asked him for. They weren't thinking about eternity. They were thinking about life here and now. And the same temptation derails people today as well. Sometimes we assume that following Jesus should give us a great life, a peace of mind, good reputation, a smooth ride through life. But here's the thing. If we really understood what Jesus was about, if we could see life through his eyes, we'd stop asking him for small things. Things like a quiet life or a smooth life or a bit less stress or even a calm death. Those things are wonderful blessings if you get them, but that's not why Jesus came. His blessing runs much deeper than that. And so James and John, in their earthly eyes, they were so wide open to earthly things. They wanted to be kings alongside Jesus in some earthly kingdom, but their spiritual eyes were closed. They couldn't see what was actually going on, what God was trying to achieve through Jesus' life. And Jesus saw right through them. He says this in verse 38, "You don't know what you're asking." He's just summed up in one sentence what I've been trying to say. They had no idea what was going on. You don't know what you're asking. Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with? He was right. They had no idea what they were asking. They were blind to his purposes. Now, the cup and the baptism that Jesus is talking about here simply symbolise his suffering. He's saying that when he goes to the cross, he'll be drinking the cup of suffering and judgment that we deserve. And on the cross that he'll be immersed in pain and rejection, immersed, baptised into pain and rejection and death for our sake. And that's what he's asking James and John. Can you suffer like that? And they say, yes, we can. And in fact, they did. James, within 10 years, had died by the sword for his faith, and John lived a long life. But at the end of his life, he lived in isolation, in exile, in a prison on the island of Patmos, suffering for Jesus. So Jesus said in verse 39, "You will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with." Here's the uncomfortable truth. We can fall into this trap where we want the reward without the refining work, where we want the crown without the cross, and where our assumptions lead us astray, as theirs did. They assumed an earthly kingdom, which is not what God had in mind at all. Of course, Jesus shows us another way. The submission to the Father's will is all about yielding to him, even when it's hard, even when it costs our comfort and convenience. It's about laying down our ambitions and saying, "Not my will, but yours be done." It's the opposite of self-promotion. It's humility. Paul put it like this, talking about Jesus in Philippians 2. He said, "He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross." So here, in this encounter with Jesus, James and John and the disciples, they learn, and so do we learn, that the cost of following Jesus is humility and submission to the will of the Father. It's what Jesus is showing us here, that he is submitted to the will of the Father. James and John and the other disciples just couldn't see it. And so here's my question for you today. Where might your ambition or your impatience be blinding you to what God's actually trying to do in the world? Maybe you're at uni and you have an ambition for a particular career and you've been pushing hard at that for years. Is the Lord quietly saying to you off to the side, "I've got something else in mind for you"? Or maybe you've been preparing for retirement. You have ambitions for your retirement. You say, "I'm going to travel the world, I'm going to travel here, I'm going to travel where?" And the Lord says, "Actually, now that you're free from your work commitments, I have another work for you to do in my kingdom." Is your ambition or your impatience getting in the way of you seeing what God's actually doing in the world around you and where he wants you to be? That's my question for us today, my challenge. So this week, as you think about decisions that you have to make, don't rush into them. Pause and ask, "God, what are you doing here? What would you have me do here in this decision?" And then follow through with that. And watch as your perspective changes when you stop assuming and start submitting. And so in this encounter with Jesus, the disciples, especially James and John, they're learning about the true cost of following Jesus. The first cost is submission to the Father's will, not our own. The second cost is how that gets lived out in our everyday lives, and that is by serving others. You see, if we were to ask the question, what does it look like to submit to the Father's will? The answer to that question is, it looks like serving others before yourself. Jesus put it like this in Mark 10. Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be the slave of all. He's saying the road to greatness, the road to submission to the Father's will is serving others above ourselves. Jesus came not to be served, but to serve. He says that later. And he invites us into that life. Not to be served, but to serve others, to spend our lives looking for opportunities to give others what Jesus has given to us. It's so countercultural, isn't it? That the life of following Jesus is a life of service. When we look around the world today, clearly the more popular choice is to be served, not to serve. Can you imagine a holiday package? You spend thousands, tens of thousands on a holiday package, and you arrive at your destination only to discover it includes that you've got to do all your own cooking of your own meals, and you've got to make your own beds and clean your own room. That's not what I paid for. I want to be served. I want someone else to make my bed and to cook my meals and do the dishes. Or if you go out to a restaurant, you pay a handsome sum for a meal, and then afterwards they say, you've got to come back and clean the dishes. It's like, that's not what I paid for. You're serving me here. Of course, banks are a little different. There's no service there at all, is there, really? You can walk in, take a number, and just wait your turn. I wanted to share just a little story about a different experience I had in a bank, though, one day. Jodie and I, as you know, a few years ago, moved to England for missions work. And when I arrived, I had to open a bank account. So I walked into the bank. Well, I was greeted at the door by a doorman. He said, "Good morning, sir." Well, no one calls me sir, but great. "And what's your name?" I said, "No, my name's Waynfield. How can we help you today?" And I thought, wow, I haven't even gotten the door yet. "I'd like to open a bank account." "Let me show you through." Fine. So he escorted me, started conversation, asked me how my day was going, used my name, escorted me through the building to an office where I would sit down there with another bank employee, and they helped me open the accounts. As I took a seat in the office, the doorman said to me, "May I make you a coffee, sir?" I'm like, "Sure, you can make me a coffee." I couldn't believe it. I thought, am I really in the bank? Have I walked in the right place here? So he made me a coffee, white with 2 sugars, fantastic. So I got a cup of coffee. Then when I'd finished up signing all the paperwork, he escorted me out of the building. And on the way out, he said, "I'd like to introduce you to the manager." I thought, I'm going to meet the manager of the bank. Okay. So he introduced himself. "Hey, thank you for your business today, sir." I thought, these people must think I'm loaded. They don't realise I'm a broke missionary. But the final thing which really tipped it over the edge for me is just before I was leaving, the doorman said to me, "Mr. Field, here's my card. My phone number is on it. If you have any questions about your banking at any time, 24 hours a day, just call me." And I thought, far out. That is service, isn't it? You just don't get that in a bank in Australia, do you? But I want to take the opportunity to say that is service. And I hope we have that kind of service here. When someone walks into the building, that we would treat them in that way. "Come on in. Let me make you a cup of coffee. Can I find you a chair? Let me introduce you to some people." That's the kind of service we really need to have here. But it was wonderful to be served. It's not the way of the Christian life, though, is it? We are to serve others. We are to see the person walking in and to put their needs before ours. That's how I believe every visitor should be treated when they come to Rivo. See, serving others is not just a nice idea, it's really practical. It's something we do. It's about us putting the needs of others above our own. When James and John made their request, the other disciples were outraged about that because James and John had put their own needs above everyone else's. And that wasn't the kingdom way. It's not the kingdom way. And Jesus' way is to lift others up, to put the needs of others before our own. That's the currency of Jesus' kingdom. See, serving others is not just a nice Christian add-on, it's the core of discipleship. It's the way we show we're following the Father's will. It's how submission to the Father's will actually takes shape in our everyday lives, that we put others before ourselves. And so this week, ask yourself, who can I serve in a way that's going to cost me something? Look for someone who could use your time, someone who could do with some help. It might be a neighbour or a co-worker, a family member, someone here in church. And then when you notice, step in and do something to help without expecting anything in return. And make it a habit to ask the Lord each day, how can I serve you today? How can I lift up someone else today? And then be on alert to look for opportunities. Because in the kingdom of Jesus, greatness is not about how high you climb, it's about how low you're willing to bend to help others. Finally, in this encounter that James and John had with Jesus, James and John and all the disciples, they learned that following him, it comes at a cost. And the cost is submission, the cost is service, and the cost here, thirdly, is sacrifice. And this is where the gospel hits the hardest. Sacrifice in the Christian life, it's not optional. It's part of the Christian life. It's the price of true greatness in God's kingdom. That's what we learned here. In Mark 10:45, Jesus said, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." And Jesus says, that's your blueprint for life. You're not here to be served. If you're a follower of Jesus, we're not here to be served. We're here to serve and to give our lives as a ransom for many. Jesus didn't come to get for himself. He came to give, and he calls us to that kind of life. James and John, they wanted to get the places of honour. But Jesus came to give his life for others. There's a stark contrast there, isn't there? True greatness always comes at a cost. And here that cost is sacrifice. But sacrifice isn't just about life or death heroics. It doesn't mean we need to be crucified on a cross. We might pay with our lives. Many Christians do. Most of the time, though, it's about everyday choices where we lay down our comfort, our convenience, or our personal plans in order to follow Jesus faithfully. So sometimes sacrifice can look like choosing integrity over popularity. Sacrifice can sometimes look like taking a path into ministry instead of a high-paid job in the secular workforce. Sometimes sacrifice can look like spending time with God instead of on Netflix or scrolling social media. It could mean spending the time to listen to someone who's hurting instead of looking the other way and hoping someone else deals with it. It's those everyday decisions of sacrifice that train our heart to follow Jesus. And so this week, choose one thing that's going to cost you something. It might be your time, your comfort, your pride, and use it to bless someone else. Maybe it's helping a neighbour or a colleague, giving someone your full attention, choosing to serve someone at church or in your family without expecting anything in return. And as you do this, watch how your heart changes. Because true greatness in God's kingdom, it's not measured by what we achieve or how much you're honoured. It's measured by your willingness to surrender, to serve, and to sacrifice in the name of Jesus, and just as Jesus did. Remember, Jesus didn't come to be served. He came to serve and to give. And when we follow him, that's exactly what he calls us to do. And so this story of James and John, the account here where they met with Jesus, it shows us a hard truth. And that is that selfish ambition can blind us. We want the glory, we want the throne, we want the recognition. But in their blindness, they couldn't see what God was actually doing through Jesus and his journey to the cross. They couldn't see the cross. They couldn't see the kingdom. They couldn't see the life that Jesus was calling them into. Jesus offers us something radically different. He offers us a life shaped by submission and service and sacrifice. And the disciples learned the hard way that the road to greatness in God's kingdom is the exact opposite of the world's path to greatness. The path is that the first will be last, the proud must humble themselves, the powerful are those who serve. And true reward comes not from being served, but from seeing God at work and then adjusting our lives to join him in that work. Friends, following Jesus will cost you something. It always does. But here's the paradox. It also transforms you as you pay the price of following Jesus. He does his work in your heart and it transforms your life. It turns your ambition into godly humility. It turns our busyness and distraction into effective service. It turns our wasteful comfort into meaningful sacrifice. It transforms us and it opens our eyes to what God is actually doing in the world around us. And so, friends, the cost of following Jesus, it's very high, but it transforms our hearts. It redirects our ambitions and it opens our eyes to what God is doing in the world. And so I want to leave you with this challenge, and it's this. Are you willing to let go of your ambitions long enough that you can see what God is doing in the world and join him?